Hello! Welcome to Queering Arthur, a podcast where you can join us in exploring queer interpretations of Arthurian legend. I'm Dr. Schuyler Rad.
And I'm Kelly Oakler.
Today, we're talking about the life of Saint Caranog from around 1100 CE. This episode contains references to phallic and yonic symbology, and some sexual innuendo, for fun. If any of that is not something you want to listen to, take care of yourself and skip this episode. This is part 3 of a series on the Arthurian Hagiographies. Normally, we start off with a high-level cultural view of the context of our text for the episode, but since we've already done that in previous episodes, there's a members-only episode that takes a high-level view but thrusts our attention upon the spiritual and religious context. If you didn't know, you can get access to members-only episodes by signing up to be a knight of our virtual roundtable on Patreon, which you can find through our website, www.queeringarthur.com. For now, let's zoom in on the author of today's text.
Right. Once again, there's no author.
Yeah, unfortunately, but there is some interesting discussion about the date and location of publication. Mary Jones says it was composed in Chemist, Pembrokeshire, which was a cantref of Dyfed in the 12th century.
White says possibly 1100.
And the Yale Library and Welsh Academic Press say 1200.
White doesn't give any evidence for the year.
And Mary Jones doesn't either.
But what about Yale and the WAP?
The WAP?
The Welsh Academic Press.
Oh, I thought you meant the other WAP. Well, the year of its publication is generally unknowable. Scholar JSP Tatlock says since the Arthur in this work is foiled and undisciplined, as in the life of St. Caddoc from last episode, which is common of the Welsh legends of this era, that means the Norman influence of Geoffrey's HRB is unlikely, making its publication date no later than the early 12th century.
Agreeing more with White and less with Yale or the WAP.
Macaroni in a pot.
No!
And a bit of a tangent.
Oh, really? That's not like you to go on tangents.
Ha ha. Tatlock says here that this relationship between this hagiography and Monmouth's HRB, or rather the lack of a relationship, is great evidence for being from no later than the 12th century because, he says, the HRB was spread so quickly among wide-awake people. And that quote, it reminded me of the word woke that people use today to signify progressive values and political engagement. So people who were reading the HRB at that time were progressive and politically engaged. But this article that Tatlock wrote using the phrase wide awake people, it was published in 1939.
Well, woke is from around that time, right?
Yeah, but this general sense, I guess, of an awakening or enlightenment, an arousal.
A what?
An arousal, rousing from sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, an awakening like this.
Like a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, that's from as early as the 1500s.
Middle English.
But that's like the same idea from episode 6.
Which one?
Chivalry.
Oh, when we were talking about the connection between chivalry and progressive values, as in aiding those in need.
Right. Chivalry is similar to progressive values, and being wide awake, or woke, is having progressive values. Then chivalry is like being woke.
Right. So stay chivalrous means stay woke?
Right? Is that cringe? I don't know. Or is it blowing people's minds?
Okay, but the main idea here was that Monmouth's HRB didn't influence this hagiography, giving us a good idea of its publication date.
Right, but one more thing. That Tatlock article was published in a journal called Speculum,
Oh.
which was a medieval literary genre.
Oh.
That was the forebear of the encyclopedia.
So not the...
Like the Speculum of Virgins.
What?
The Speculum of Virgins. It was a treatise on the life of nuns. It was like an encyclopedia about nuns.
Oh, well, that's enough of that.
Right. Zooming in on the text. So, Kelly, I've got a question. How do they organize books at your library?
I mean, mostly Dewey Decimal System, like a lot of libraries, and, then alphabetical by author.
Something Dewey Decimal, something...
Mm-hmm. Why do you need to know how the library is organized?
So, I promise there's a point. But let me go down this rabbit hole a little bit, or maybe, rimming the rabbit hole.
Oh, no.
In Thomas Jefferson's day, most libraries were arranged alphabetically. But Jefferson preferred to arrange his by subject, like the Dewey Decimal System. He chose Lord Bacon's Table of Sciences, the hierarchy of memory, which was history, reason, which was philosophy, and imagination, or the fine arts. And that was how he ordered his books in his library, by subject with some modifications. And another one, thinking of for libraries, have you read Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss?
I haven't.
So in their libraries, they have the archives. Historically, these archives, they were reorganized many times using different systems generated by past masters of the archives. And each reorganization has been only partially completed due to the volume of the task, leading to a condition of moderate chaos throughout the archives.
Yeah, that kind of sounds like when I try to shelve in the children's area and everything is pulled off the shelves and strewn around, and there's only so much I can get done in a certain amount of time.
That is a big task to take care of the children's section of the library. But you have a really nice children's section in your library.
Thank you. Why do you ask about this now?
So I mentioned Mary Jones at the beginning. They provide a citation for the life of St. Caranog. The citation is unlike the Dewey Decimal System. It goes like this. London, British Library, Cotton Collection, Vespasian A, XIV.
That's not a citation like any I've ever heard.
Right?
So what does it mean?
So London, that's the capital city of the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And the British Library is the National Library of the United Kingdom.
Uh-huh.
And the Cotton Collection...
Yeah, that one. That part. What's that?
Right. So after the dissolution of the monasteries in the early 1500s, that was when Henri VIII was dismantling Catholicism in Britain.
And people were really losing their heads.
Aha, I see what you did there.
Thank you, thank you. I'm here all week.
Oh, God. Anyways, texts from dissolved monasteries, among other treasures, were spread across Great Britain. But by about 75 years later, Sir Robert Bruce Cotton, a distinguished bibliophile, worked to gather up all of those works that had been disseminated.
All right, so that's the Cotton part of the citation. And Vespasian? Wasn't Vespasian a Roman emperor?
Yeah, exactly. Cotton's library had bookcases, and atop each bookcase was the bust of a Roman emperor.
So Vespasian tells you which bookcase to find the volume on.
Right.
I guess that's one way to organize your books. And what about the AXIV?
That means the book was on shelf A and the 14th book on the shelf.
Well, immediately that's a problem for if you add a new book to the collection. Like, what do you do then?
Well, he's dead, so...
Right, but just a general critique.
Yeah, that's the advantage of the Dewey Decimal System or the Library of Congress system. It leaves room to expand.
Okay, so his collection is in stasis. There are no books being added.
Yeah.
Wow. A library full of priceless artifacts from High Middle Ages, Reformation in Britain. Sure would be terrible if something happened to them.
Good news, everyone! There was a fire in the library in 1731.
Long after he died.
Yeah, and then the collection was donated to the British Museum in 1753.
And that's how we got this text.
Yeah, and the rest of the collection is quite impressive too.
Like?
Well, there's Vitellius AXV.
Which is?
The Noel Codex.
Which?
Beowulf.
Beowulf.
Yes, it's the only known source of that epic poem.
There are no other sources?
Yeah, that's right. Every copy of Beowulf in existence today, whether in print or digital, is derived from the Noel Codex, which was a text that Cotton bought from Lawrence Noel, whom it is named after.
That's weird. Because famous books, like the HRB, there are a lot of surviving copies, indicating they were famous, that a lot of people wanted their own copy.
Yeah, you're right. I guess maybe Beowulf is just famous because some rich guy owned it?
Well, no. Beowulf really stands out because of its awesome storytelling, interesting characters, and deep themes. It's a real masterpiece of Old English literature.
Of the Old English literature that we still have.
That's a totally valid point. There could have been a lot of epic poems from that time that were just as amazing as Beowulf, or even more so. But things like decay, fires, wars, or simply being forgotten and not copied again could have caused them to be lost.
Or censorship.
Yeah, true. Censorship could have played a role too, especially with religious and political shifts, like the dissolution of the monasteries.
Yep. New rulers or religious leaders may not have approved of older stories and tried to suppress them. But that doesn't change the specialness of Beowulf, like you were saying. It's definitely a gem. It's likely not the only deep and complex and rich epic poem from that time.
But it is one of the few that have managed to survive the test of time, which, yeah, makes it really special.
Special books. Like something to be gentle with. I'm thinking of those scenes from shows and movies where the librarian gently sets this old book on a table and turns the pages wearing gloves.
Well, they don't wear gloves.
Really?
Yeah, gloves reduce our ability to feel what we're doing, and they get caught on old pages and can damage old manuscripts.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. But so this copy of Beowulf and this copy of the Life of Caranog are at the British Library.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to go visit, like to get a pass or something and view the old manuscript with the help of the librarian.
I'll leave my gloves at home.
Yeah.
Well, remember, the cotton collection was partially destroyed by fire in 1731.
Oh, so it had been copied by then.
Right. But also the British Library, and I was looking at their website, because I was interested in that too, going to visit, and it said they had a cyber attack. So there are currently lots of restrictions at the British Library.
Wow. So fire was the bane of the library, and now it's cyber attacks.
Funny enough, a firewall would have protected against both.
Boo.
But so it is at the British Library, and I did find it in searching their catalog, but I just couldn't get my eyes on it.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That would be really neat.
Well, Stanford has cataloged the cotton collection as well in scholars Elaine Treharne's and Mary Swan's English Manuscripts project. It's called EM 1060, and Yale has an interlinear volume by Arthur Wade Evans from 1944.
What's EM 1060?
It's that project from the Stanford scholars. It's really interesting, specifically looking at Old English manuscripts from 1060 to 1220. That's called the post-conquest Old English.
Post-conquest as in after the Norman conquest.
Right, and that's why it's so interesting. Scholar Andrew Prescott said that this EM 1060 project, which was finished in 2010, it was a paradigm-shifting, fundamental challenge to the foundation myths of the English nation.
Yeah, Old English was still spoken in England after the Norman conquest. It wasn't just one day the English spoke Old English, and the next day Norman French influence suddenly helped everyone speak Middle English.
Right, Middle English, or at least this is what I was taught, can only be said to be fully developed by the time of Shakespeare, which was a full 500 years after the Norman invasion.
And we're living 500 years after Shakespeare.
Yeah. So it took 500 years to go from Old English to Middle English. And here we are, 500 years after Middle English, speaking modern English. Wonder what the language will be like 500 years from now.
Macaroni in a pot.
No. Now let's get to the queer stuff, by not just zooming in on the text, but looking at the text with a queer lens. The first queer utterance that stood out to me was at the end of page 16 on to page 17, when it describes an altar that St. Caranog received, which was a color that nobody could discern.
That's a horse of a different color.
What?
Like the Wizard of Oz. And that's why it's queer, because it's outside the rainbow, or over the rainbow even.
Yeah, exactly.
But the rainbow colors are the queer symbol. How is Beyond the Rainbow queer too, besides being a friend of Dorothy?
Well, so the colors of the rainbow are visible light. It's diffused and refracted light. And while people say Roy G. Biv to remember some orders of the colors of the rainbow, it's just not in these strict categories. It's a spectrum, the light spectrum.
Yeah, disrupting static categories is a huge part of queer theory.
Right. Like with gender and sexuality, it's not just homosexual and heterosexual, or man and woman. Queering these traditional categories allows us to see a spectrum of gender and sexuality.
And it's one thing to envision a spectrum, but then going beyond the spectrum, like this altar is a...
That reminds me of the scene in Battlestar Galactica. It's the Cylon is complaining about being a human being.
Roll the clip.
In all your travels, have you ever seen a star supernova?
No.
Well, I have. I was there, I wanted to see it, and be part of the moment. And you know how I perceived one of the most glorious events in the universe? With these ridiculous gelatinous orbs in my skull, with eyes designed to perceive only a tiny fraction of the EM spectrum.
The five of us designed you to be as human as possible.
I don't want to be human. I want to see gamma rays. And I could know much more. I could experience so much more, but I'm trapped in this absurd body. And why? Because my 5 creators thought that God wanted it that way.
Now there's a good dictionary entry.
What's that?
Eyeballs. Noun. Ridiculous gelatinous orbs in a human skull. Yeah, it's one thing to dismantle binaries and disrupt static categories, but it's another step to go beyond that spectrum.
Yeah, to transcend the spectrum.
Like with color, it's beyond human ability to see UV and infrared light.
But we've developed the technology to perceive those things.
Yeah, technology, like we talked about a few episodes ago. Technology is using knowledge to accomplish a goal.
Oh, I like that. So dismantling the gender binary is a technological development.
Yeah, trans women. A great leap forward in human technology.
Just as we have developed UV meters and infrared cameras, which are technologies to detect colors beyond the light spectrum, non-binary gender and transgender identities are technologies to detect...
What is it?
Well, there's envisioning light as a spectrum rather than these discrete categories.
Roy G. Biv.
Right. But that's different from going beyond the light spectrum.
Like UV and infrared light that go beyond the spectrum. So where's the controversy?
So which of these types is non-binary gender and which is transgender?
Well, both encapsulate the idea of dismantling the static categories or disrupting the binary. Both are analogous to light as a spectrum, but what is going beyond the spectrum in this analogy?
I guess it's a person, the gender of whom nobody can discern. Like the altar, a color nobody can discern, beyond the light spectrum. I don't know, it's more philosophical and less empirical at this point. It's not really a proper hypothesis, more like in a thought experiment.
That sounds like a great question for our group chat.
Yeah.
But zooming out, this altar of St. Caranog, the color of which nobody can discern, highlights the idea of not just the color spectrum, but going beyond perceivable light.
Transcending the spectrum.
That's why this queer utterance scores a 2 on the queer authenticity scale.
And is authentically queer. Next in this short selection from the White Anthology is when St. Caranog placed the altar in the sea on page 17.
That's weird, but why is it queer?
It be weird, but the sea, she be the she, and the altar...
Oh, and the altar is the
phallic object, yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Well, it's not just me with my mind in the gutter. French sociologist Henri Lefebvre argued that vertical buildings metaphorically symbolize force, male fertility, and masculine violence. And he made use of these amazing vocabulary terms like phallic verticality and phallic erectility and my favorite, phallic brutality.
Brutal phallus.
Great rock
I don't know
band.
where that came from.
That's so metal.
What's the difference? The difference between those terms?
Lefebvre thought that phallic erectility was a symbol of how the phallus shape rules our space, while phallic brutality is not abstract. It's the literal brutality of political power.
So phallic erectility proclaims what is right, while phallic brutality does not remain abstract?
Yeah.
Not abstract.
Yeah.
So the phallic building is concrete.
Ooh.
Phallocratic is such a gross word, but not like disgusting gross. It's gross like disturbing. It's like gives me the ick.
Yeah, I agree. Lefebvre said that the vertical buildings are arrogant.
Yeah, conveying a need to impress, an impression of authority and thereby violence.
Well, now that you're taking a stance like that, it makes me want to disagree. Because those buildings, the raw materials, they come from somewhere. Like the steel and glass were mined out of the earth, which is like creating a yonic structure. Digging a pit to gather the raw materials is to the yonic as the building of skyscrapers is to the phallic.
I'm not familiar with the word yonic. What is that?
Yonic, it comes from a Sanskrit word. It means vulva or vagina, just like phallus is related to penis. So yonic and phallic are similar words to describe different things. You'll see yonic symbolism in Hindu belief and other religions from that area of the world.
Okay. So it's coming from the Mother Earth.
Right, these raw materials, they come from Mother Earth and they reach into Father Sky.
Dang. So that's kind of the opposite of the Garden of Eden story from the Hebrew Bible, where the woman is made from the man's rib. people build buildings reaching into the sky from the raw materials mined from the earth, constructing a masculine from the feminine.
Yeah, it is quite the opposite. And the earth being the thing we dig down, and the word hell comes from digging a hole and concealing a thing in the earth. So there's this direct connection between digging down into the earth, creating a feminine object, a hole, the yonic symbol, this direct connection between the feminine and evil, mythologically and symbolically.
Skyscrapers represent phallic masculine power, and mined raw materials represent the yonic feminine.
Yeah, exploiting the earth, they're representing how the feminine is exploited and used.
But so we're getting deep into things, so let's zoom out.
Right.
We talked about the architectural theory of phallic brutality and erectility and discussed some sort of spiritual ideas of Mother Earth. But this utterance is from an altar in the sea, not a building from the earth.
Yeah, and the altar in the story, it's this heavenly object, like we were saying, the color of which no one can discern. So it's not really clear that the altar really even is phallic. In fact, later in the story, it's said that Arthur places objects on this altar using it as a table, which some say it's the earliest reference to the round table.
Right. An altar could be more horizontal, and offerings could be placed upon it. But this particular interpretation of the altar being phallic and the sea being yonic, it scores a -2 on the queer authenticity scale, being inauthentically queer.
The last queer utterance from this selection was on page 17 and says, "The altar landed in the harbor of Guellit, and Arthur said Caranog should be given a 12th of part of the fields of that area. And later, Caranog returned and built a church there."
So this altar from over the rainbow landed somewhere after having flown around, and Arthur saw that as some divine sign that the land should be given to the church. Why is that queer?
First, I marked it because the saint receiving a gift of land from a king is a queer way to mythologize this medieval practice called bookland.
Bookland, when the king gives land as a gift to solidify his power in a charter.
Right, as opposed to folkland, which was land owned by historical precedent.
Sounds like a mythological explanation for a deeply political practice of the time period.
Yeah, I agree. This mythologization may have been a way to justify those politics.
Oh, so the land that had once belonged to the native Britons was now in the hands of the church. So anyone who complained that their indigenous lands had been stolen were not just complaining about the local government, they were complaining about the church.
And by extension, defying their Christian God.
That does sound queer.
But wait, there's more.
Oh?
I tried to look up where this place was, the Harbor of Guellit.
Uh-huh. So where is it?
Well, it's uncertain.
Of course it is.
But that doesn't stop scholars from gathering evidence with replicable methodology to make a falsifiable claim. And it's that act of replication, or revisiting prior conclusions with new perspectives, that disrupts established narratives, which is a queer hermeneutic. This is strikingly evident in Andrew Breeze's re-examination of the Harbor of Guellit.
Queer archaeology, not just for gay dinosaurs.
Rawr.
Life finds a way.
Central to Breeze's thesis is the reconciliation of two key geographical locations mentioned in this selection. There's the Harbor of Guellit and the city of Caranog. Previous interpretations placed these sites in Somerset, but Breeze clearly challenges this established narrative. He identifies Guellit with the Guilchis stream at Crantock, formerly known as the Guellit, situating this harbor in Cornwall rather than Somerset. Similarly, he links the city of Caranog with the historical and linguistic evidence of Crantock, suggesting a localized and interlinked narrative of these places within the Cornish landscape. This reinterpretation does not merely shift geographical coordinates, but it provides a more coherent narrative that respects the historical and cultural context of the region.
Cornwall. Okay, here it is on the map. It's in the very southwest of England, but I thought Arthur was Welsh.
Well, Arthur was king of the Britons.
King of the who?
The Britons!
Oh, so that area was part of the native lands of the ancient British people.
Which, you're right, does also include modern-day Wales, or company.
Oh, and here's Tintagel, on the farthest west coast of Cornwall. Isn't that where Arthur was supposed to have been born?
That's what Monmouth says in the HRB.
So it's a myth.
People got really excited in 1998 when archaeologists found a stone inscribed with the name Artaganu, because the name shares a root word with Arthur.
Sounds promising.
The full inscription says, Paternus coli avi ficit Artaganu.
Which means?
Artaganu, descendant of Caldus, made this.
Sounds like medieval graffiti.
Right, Arthur was here.
So the Arthur-like figure, a concept of local lords pooling their resources, repeated many times, is still the best idea.
Right. Maybe one of these Arthur-like figures was born at Tintagel.
Could that Arthur-like person in Tintagel have been named Artaganu?
Well, like you said, it's pretty much medieval graffiti. It was carved into some random rock found only after consistent excavation, not some professionally made piece of stone carved into the cornerstone of the building by a mason.
But this queer archaeology, it challenges conventional narratives and embraces marginalized perspectives. Like queering, which often reveals overlooked aspects of gender and sexuality in society, Breeze's approach questions the established geographic interpretations.
Yeah, fascinating, right? It sheds new light on Dark Age Cornwall, which really was an oppressed area of Great Britain long into the fight between the native Britons and the Anglo-Saxons.
So zooming out, you originally marked this as queer because it was a way for the powerful to justify taking land from the native inhabitants.
But Breeze's work serves as a reminder of the dynamic nature of historical interpretation. It invites us to continually explore the past with open minds and diverse methodologies.
But just because Breeze uses a queer method doesn't mean it relates to the text being queer.
Right, although there are multiple interpretations of the real location of Guellit, there is no political or artistic reason for this. Although this mythological justification for Bookland may have been political, and thereby making it a queer interpretation, this secondary aspect of Breeze's queer archaeology points simply to differing linguistic interpretations lost to time.
And that's why this utterance scores a 0 on the queer authenticity scale and is neither authentically nor inauthentically queer.
Damn right.
We'd like to thank our friends and family, especially Andrew Chard, our patrons and listeners. We support the mission of the Nisqually tribe to perpetuate their home and their culture by helping their people thrive, and we support the mission of the Squaxin Island tribe to maintain the pride, honor, and dignity that is their traditional way.
So today's episode was the first time we talked about the Round Table in Arthurian myth, and we do have a virtual round table that people can be a part of, right?
We sure do. If you sign up... That's right, Shyler. You can be a part of it today if you sign up for our Patreon. Do you want to do it again? Or do you want to do something else?
So today's episode was the first time we talked about the Round Table in Arthurian myth. And we do have a virtual round table that you, our listener, can be a part of. If you sign up on our Patreon, you can be part of the queer retinue, or a knight of the virtual round table. And if you are itching for more Queering Arthur content, we've got funny videos on YouTube. That's our main outlet for content outside of podcasts. So please like, comment, subscribe, share, shout from the mountaintops.
You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. We have a Tumblr. And if you want to find us on Discord, you can join our Patreon, like we said. And you can email us if you have any comments, questions, concerns, or queries at queeringarthurpodcast@gmail.com.
I am ugly, and I am proud.
Careful, SpongeBob. Careful, SpongeBob.
Now that you know a little bit about dismantling static categories in queer theory, as we talked about with the altar, the color of which no one could discern, let me leave you with this. If queer theory is characterized by certain tactics and strategies like dismantling static categories, is it internally inconsistent? Or does it transcend the traditional views of static categories? Perhaps it is still developing and a historical perspective will be more beneficial. Or maybe something else that you can think of. Regardless of your answer, keep thinking queerly, especially about queer theory itself. There are forces that seek to institutionalize and codify queer theory so that it can be used as a tool of exclusion and oppression. Stay chivalrous, queerthers.